Frustrated with watercolor? This is the episode for you. I have a PDF that lays out 11 common challenges that are faced by watercolor artists. Honestly, you can face them at any point in your journey, not just if you're a beginner. The PDF is available for you right in the video's description. Consider this your handy-dandy guide to help you if you run into specific problems like cauliflowers blooming, paper buckling or warping, paintings drying dull, muddy colors or overworked paintings, if your painting turns green, how to get white, inaccurate drawings, dealing with water control, busy backgrounds, knowing when to stop, dealing with poor reference photos, and finding a way to fix flat paintings. I don't like calling these things mistakes because anything you're doing when you sit down to paint, you are learning. So you are making progress. It might not be the progress of a finished painting, but you're still learning and you're still growing. I'm not going to demo all of these problems and kind of how to fix them because that would take a really long time. And I've also kind of laid out how to avoid these things in my other videos in the program. And also the live episodes through this whole 3-3 program for beginners answers a lot of really common questions. If there's a specific problem you would just have not found the answer to yet, please let me know in the comments. I will, however, say that the problem you're facing might not be your fault. It could be the supplies that you're using. If you think it's your supplies, I would encourage you to go back and watch the lessons about watercolor supplies, and that might help you decide where to invest in more high-quality supplies. Spoiler alert, it's probably your paper. And you guessed it, your supply list is waiting for you at paint333.com. Here's a few specific examples of ways that I've improved my art over the years. You can see with these portraits of Archie and the Beagle that they just kind of look busy. They have busy backgrounds and a lot of color. Simplifying your backgrounds, remembering that less is more, and implementing the 3 principles will all help with this issue. In this portrait of Eddie, it just looks a little flat. Now when I paint, I make sure to employ the principle of contrast. And for this painting specifically, it could have been more dynamic had I employed the principle of contrast as it relates to value, lights and darks. But don't worry, we're just a few lessons away from covering that whole principle of contrast in more detail. This portrait of a Boston Terrier is also kind of busy, but it's mostly just flat. Again, this is an issue with value. There's not much variation, it's just kind of dark all over. You can see in this newer portrait of a Boston Terrier that the contrast between blurry and detailed is adding a lot of interest to the painting. You can also see how mastering techniques, incorporating color in strategic ways, and simplifying the background also helped create a more interesting and dramatic portrait. I wanted to highlight the issue of inaccurate drawing in this portrait of Raja. Overall, I was really happy with how this turned out, but as I look back on it, I can see that there's flaws in how I drew it. So employing some kind of system, whether that's spending more time on your drawing or the grid system or tracing like I do, will help ensure that you draw your portraits accurately so they actually turn out. My brother asked me to paint a collage of all his 4 animals a while back. And overall, I have really liked this portrait, even though I know there's so many ways I could have improved it. But it's fun, right? But I think there's still some things we can learn from it. The main way I could have improved this portrait was just having a grasp and an understanding and a mastery of different watercolor techniques. The first would be whiskers. Obviously on this portrait, the whiskers are really intense and thick. And not only are they just out of proportion, but they're kind of distracting against their subjects. There's some muddy colors, especially on the dogs. I obviously added too much color and overworked it a little too much. And it's also clear that I was relying too heavily on wet on dry techniques, which give the impression of just too much control. They make tight, stiff paintings. Now when I paint, I usually employ a lot more wet on wet techniques with the 3-step process, where I paint with water, drop in color, and finish with texture techniques. But as you can see in this portrait, it looks very controlled and precise, in a way that just doesn't add a lot of interest to the painting. My favorite animal in this portrait is Princess, the Himalayan cat. She has a lot of expression and she's interesting, so I went and I actually repainted her in this portrait of Princess. And I think it just turned out a lot better. The whiskers are thinner and they're not so intense, they're not distracting. You can tell I used more wet and wet techniques, and you can tell I planned out my colors. So the last thing I want to say is lean into your style. Maybe your style is to be fast, loose, less detailed, more detailed. Maybe you like it cartoony or more abstract. Not every mistake is actually a mistake. In the portraits I do now, I typically have cauliflowers or blooming in there on purpose. So there's no one right way to watercolor, and I've said that before. But if you are struggling, this PDF and these resources might just help you out. We have another live Q&A tomorrow, and then our next lesson is the highly anticipated bunny paint along. So until we meet again, happy painting.